It is finally happening. We are going through Elbaf's lore-filled past, and although the focus of the flashback will be primarily centered around Loki, it also has immense potential to show us centuries of history through the eyes of the people, or should I say, the giants who actually lived through it. And what makes this so special, what makes Elbaf stand out from all the other flashbacks, each of them moving and incredibly meaningful, is that Elbaf is old. Elbaf remembers. Elbaf gives us the potential of centuries, nay, millennia of stories. The gods, the myths, the pirates, even the very first pirate to be exact. The history of Joy Boy. And while the truth of the circumstances surrounding Harold's death is exciting enough, there's potential to see stories that have been passed down from generation to generation to generation. The truth about what the world government has tried to erase, the world before the existence of the world government. We are talking about details of the sun god legend himself. And alongside all of these deep lore, there's also one character whose story may unexpectedly but intricately relate to all of this. And that's the story of the infamous pirate Xebec. But before we dive deep into the Elbaf flashback and what we may expect, please take a quick second to click subscribe to the channel if you haven't already to help your fellow One Piece fan get to 100,000 subscribers. In return, I'll make sure you never run out of One Piece content. Okay, let's begin. Out of all the little snippets that we've seen of Loki's flashback, I'm pretty sure everyone is very excitedly waiting for the full story of the encounter between Loki and Xebec. In chapter 1145, even before Loki's flashback really began, we saw a young Loki asked Rox to take him out to sea, very much mirroring what we saw in the very first chapter of One Piece with Luffy and Shanks, making us immediately empathize and relate to the scene, igniting a spark so that we want to see more of this unfold. Now, the first thing that I want to note is that it's a little unclear as to where this encounter actually took place. Was it in Elbaf during one of Rox's exploration, or could it have been on another island entirely? Maybe during one of Harold's voyages where he perhaps took Loki along and Rox just happened to be there. After all, we did see Harold tell his kingdom that he'll be traveling overseas more often as part of his cultural exchange program. But in the event of the more straightforward case, where we suppose Rox did in fact just stop by at Elbaf, this raises a lot of intriguing questions as to what he sought at this fabled legendary kingdom. Was he after the legendary devil fruit, for example? After all, it did seem like that was the reason why the Rox pirates were interested in God Valley. They wanted to get their hands on the legendary devil fruits that were being offered up as prizes for the native hunting competition, suggesting that this crew was on the hunt for legendary devil fruits and perhaps even very specific devil fruits. Because we see Whitebeard make a very interesting comment in chapter 1095. He warns that they should make certain before making any moves. And it's not exactly clear what he means by this, but given the context, I've interpreted this as him saying that the crew should make certain of what the devil fruits actually are. Which is why I think it's possible that the Rox pirates were actively seeking out very specific legendary devil fruits. Which I guess is just one more example of yet another similarity between Rox and Blackbeard. We know that Blackbeard, even after specifically hunting down the Yami Yami no Mi for himself, Blackbeard has also continued to hunt down very specific, very special legendary devil fruits for the other members of his crew. And with all of the other clues that have connected Blackbeard to Xebec, this one is pretty hard to ignore. Which then goes back to my question of, was he going after the legendary devil fruit that has been in the possession of the Elbafian royal family? And if you have watched my recent videos, you'll know that I seriously suspect that that legendary devil fruit is none other than the Nika devil fruit. But you can watch that video later. Alternatively, did Rox want to take a look at the Harley mural? Especially given that one of the first things we found out about Xebec was that he was looking into the world's taboos, and according to the world government, trying to find out anything about the world government's secret exploitative actions is a taboo. So it's fair to assume that Rox was simply persecuted by the world government for wanting to find out about the truth of the world's history, in which case the Harley and that mural, aside from the poneglyphs, those are probably the most incredibly, intensely lore-filled pieces of information that exists in the One Piece world. In any case, regardless of what Rox may have been doing, or even where the two may have met. One thing is obvious. Rox left a serious impression on Loki. And honestly, it's not hard to see why. One of the most defining things we know about Xebec is that he was completely ruthless. He didn't care if you were a celestial dragon or a slave. If you were in the way, you were getting crushed. That kind of attitude would have hit hard for someone like Loki. A child who likely felt unloved, misunderstood, and burdened by a title he never asked for. Being raised by a peace-seeking king like Harold, someone constantly trying to calm things down, while also being treated like a walking curse by the rest of Elbaf. Yeah, you can imagine the pressure building up. That inner chaos, the need to push back, to act out. So when he sees someone like Rox, someone who doesn't play by the rules, someone who burns everything down without apology, that's not just cool to a kid like Loki. That's freedom. That's power. And for an impressionable child who's never felt in control of his own story, that kind of role model would have been magnetic. Loki was just a kid, and like any kid, he was looking for something or someone to show him what he could become. And one of the best things about One Piece is the depth of character relationships that's built over time. I mean, remember back to Marineford when Oars Jr. risked everything to try and save Ace. Sure, they were crewmates. It's what you do for your family. But then we get a flashback showing Ace giving Oars Jr. a Kaza hat, something that he learned to make from Tama back in the Amigasa village. It's a small gesture, but it ties everything together between islands, between arcs. It's moments like that which make the One Piece world feel so interconnected. Like every small gesture, every small island has a big ripple effect. Character relationships that span larger than just those figures involved, contributing to a much bigger picture of the expansive world around them. And now with Loki's story spanning decades, unfolding alongside titanic events like the God Valley incident, like Roger's final voyage. It is one of the most fascinating narratives that Oda has ever set in motion. We're finally going to be able to connect the dots to mysteries we've been wondering about for years. I mean, it's almost guaranteed that we're going to hear more about the God Valley incident soon, which then means that you can bet all the other major figures from that era are also going to get a spotlight. We're talking about the prime era of the Rocks Pirates, the golden age of monsters, when the crew involved the younger versions of Whitebeard, Kaido, Big Mom, Shiki, Captain John, and more. Just the thought of seeing those titans in action is enough to send shivers down your spine. We've seen the emperors in their twilight years, but watching their younger selves clash, scheme, and tear through the world under the same flag, that's a whole different experience that we have been burning, waiting to experience ever since we first found out that they all used to be on the same crew over 5 years ago, all the way back in chapter 957. And beyond the spectacle, there is lore, long-lost mysteries that could finally give us answers, like the true story behind Captain John's treasure. That's a plot thread that has been dangling since the very earliest arcs of One Piece, or the real reason why the world government feared Rock so much that they had to completely erase him from history. If Elbaf gets caught in the middle of that history, if Loki's past is directly related to the downhill of Rocks, then this flashback could just be one of the most important pieces of the puzzle we have yet to receive. Because while Rocks himself is an exciting character, he too represents something much bigger than just himself. It's been highly suggested that the reason for his death has to do with the world's deepest, darkest secrets that the world government wants to keep hidden, and with Elbaf so intricately tied to the world's deep lore, I'm sure what we're all keenly waiting to see is more reveals unpacking the true history of Joy Boy and the legend of the sun god Nika, the warrior of liberation, the warrior of the sun. Is he a savior or the harbinger of chaos? Why is he known as both the liberator and the destroyer? Whatever it is, his name too has been wiped out from history by the world government, and yet his legend, forever tied to Joy Boy and now channeled by Luffy, he's become one of the most compelling threads in the entire series. And the One one place where his legacy, his memory still lives on is Elbaf. Even before we were introduced to the concept of Nika as an entity, we've known that the Elbafian giants worship something like the sun god. We've seen that they have an annual winter solstice festival where they fast for 12 days to honor the death and the rebirth of the sun. They still worship Nika. We've already seen glimpses of Elbaf's great historical relevance through the Harley, the mural, and the ancient Iron Giant tech lab. And so I'm sure, like me, all of us, we cannot wait to see what gets further revealed through Elbaf's flashback. Outside of Luffy and Joy Boy and I guess Nika, one of the other most important, if not the most important name in the series is probably also going to show up in the arc. And of course, by that, I'm talking about Roger. We already know that the Roger pirates sailed around the seas, they went everywhere there is to go, and I'd bet anything that Roger left some kind of impact at Elbaf, especially now knowing Shanks' connection to Elbaf. But the moment that got me really curious about the connection to this island was Gaban's conversation with Shanks, which got cut off. So in chapter 1152, Gaban asks Shanks whether he remembers Little Garden, and Shanks responds, of course, but before Gaban could finish what he's about to say, Ripley interrupts them. And that moment has really weirdly stuck out to me. It really makes me wonder what sort of big thing might have happened back then or back at Little Garden, and whether we're going to see it in this flashback. Whether it's a story that ties Elbaf and Little Garden together, or something more personal about Gaban visiting that island. I feel like we're finally going to see the Roger Pirates version of events, and this is just my own headcanon, but I can totally imagine Rayleigh and Gaban having their own dinosaur hunting competition back in the day. You know, further mirroring the Zoro-Sanji relationship. You know what, maybe even Shanks and Buggy could have gotten in on it too. Either way, we might finally find out why this island has always felt so important. Because seriously, an island full of prehistoric creatures we saw all the way back in the very early Grand Line days, that just can't be a random setting. How deep does the connection between Elbaf and Little Garden really go? And that's one of the best things about Elbaf. As an island that was introduced to us from so early on in the series, it has remained a very noteworthy kingdom that intersects with so many other stories and plot threads and characters. For example, the mystery of why Emmet, the Iron Giant, attacked Marijois 200 years ago. Aside from the Gorosei, the Elbafians may be the only figures alive who can tell that tale. The only ones that even remember that it happened. Especially noting that, again, there is an ancient Iron Giant looking tech lab at Elbaf. So Elbaf may have even been involved with what happened at Marijois that day, or other events and characters we know for sure are related to Elbaf. For example, Loki's birth happened around the same time that Big Mom was abandoned at Elbaf by her parents. So I think there's a good chance that that topic gets focused on, especially the connection to Mother Carmel. I don't think Big Mom herself would take up too much time, seeing as we already got her backstory in detail, but I could definitely see a moment of someone reacting to Lin Lin destroying the village. And now that we know more about Loki's birth and the perception towards him, because that was one more tragedy to further the belief of Loki as this accursed child. But the Mother Carmel connection is the one I'm really looking forward to. The fact that this underworld mountain witch ran her operations from Elbaf is very intriguing. Long before we were ever told about King Harold's plans to reform the kingdom, to bring about peace with other nations, we've seen Lord Yarul and Yarul talk about how it was Mother Carmel that was advocating for Elbaf to begin trading with other nations, to set up trade relations instead of waging war. So then knowing that King Harold wanted to pursue the same thing, and knowing Carmel's dealings with the world government, it almost feels confirmed that Mother Carmel would have played a part in whatever relationship between Harold and the world government. She could have been feeding him with what the world government wanted her to tell him, the king unaware of her double identity the entire time. And then there's the whole Saul and O'Hara connection, with Saul arriving in Elbaf and founding the Walrus School at the king's request, which is another thread that I'm super curious about, because in chapter 1066 we saw Saul bandaged up in a library after the fall of O'Hara, and I do think think we will get more info about what happened between then and now. His connection to Vegapunk may also be really important because we know Vegapunk studied at Elbaf for some time, and maybe this even links all the way back to Dragon, who was also present at Ohara's aftermath, so the idea that Dragon may also appear in Elbaf flashback, I am feeling very hopeful. I also have to say, as excited as I am to uncover all of the deeper lore and mysteries and secrets, all the bigger world type stuff, I'm equally excited to be diving deeper into Loki's character. And when it comes to character dynamics, the one I'm personally most excited for is the relationship between Loki and Haruden. We've already seen glimpses of their past, Loki acting like a bratty little brother, mocking Haruden, calling him weak, but beyond just teasing him about his strength or lack thereof, there's something even deeper, because we've seen that Loki even made fun of Haruden's mother. Loki claimed that Haruden's mother, Ida, has tainted Elbaf's royal bloodline. That is harsh, and it goes deeper into the race relations at Elbaf, which is something we have to unpack. And again, if you have been watching my channel, you will already know my theory that I do think that Mosa is actually Ida, Haruden's mother, and after chapter 1153, I'm starting to connect the dots even more. I mean, think about it, Loki grew up without his mother, whereas Haruden had someone who loved him and cared for him. That kind of contrast would absolutely create resentment. Imagine Loki as a kid watching Ida give her full attention and love to Haruden, whereas he remembers how cold Estrid was during the very short time she was still alive. The emotional gap would have been brutal. And actually, in chapter 1136 and 1153, we find out that Queen Estrid died only a year after giving birth to Loki, and I'm also really curious as to whether there were any strange or suspicious circumstances surrounding her death. You know, was it natural? Was it connected to Loki's birth? Was it actually something more sinister? Because there's something about it that just doesn't sit right, especially because of what we know about Estrid. But there's also one more thing that I keep wondering. Does Loki even remember his mother? She was only around for the first year of his life. Most people don't have a single memory from that period. But this is One Piece where emotions and trauma run deeper than logic. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Loki has memories, even blurry ones, about being abandoned or about being hurt by Estrid. Maybe he just remembers being thrown off a cliff, or maybe just the absence of affection. Maybe he doesn't actually consciously remember anything about Estrid, but the scar that she left behind is still very much present. It might not be about memory at all, and it could just be instinct. Maybe from the very beginning, Loki felt the rejection, and that's a very big part of what makes him different. If his pain isn't from anything he specifically remembers, but from a feeling that he just hasn't ever been able to shake. That would be devastating, and it very much fits with what we've seen of his character already. Meanwhile, Loki sees Haruden being hugged, being nurtured, being raised with warmth. That jealousy definitely would have been built up over the years, and so when Loki mocks Ida, that cruelty actually just stems from Loki wanting what Haruden had. And then what's really sticking with me is that in chapter 1153, we see that Ida doesn't even seem to hate Loki at all. She even encourages Haruden to go see and visit his little brother, whereas Haruden refuses, saying that Loki isn't her son. That's such a raw moment. Now, the obvious assumption would be that Loki probably rejected Ida's kindness. Maybe he wanted it, but just didn't know how to accept it. Maybe he felt embarrassed, or maybe he didn't think he deserved it, and maybe there really are some messed up giant relations that impacted all of this. But if Ida really is Mosa, then I think there is a very powerful full circle moment waiting to happen, because maybe Ida really did try with Loki. Maybe she still sees him as family. And maybe, just maybe, Loki will finally accept that love. We know that Estrid is dead, that part of the story is over, but Ida's fate is still left open, and I'm holding on to this theory with everything that I have, because for me, this kind of storytelling hits the hardest. Like I said, I love the bigger world building lore, but honestly, I am equally just as here for the family drama, the emotional side of the story. I can't wait to see that unfold. Now, those are just some of the things off the top of my head. I know there are plenty others to unpack in this Elbaf flashback, like the astral plane, for example. We are almost 1 year into Elbaf, and we still have not seen the astral plane and what sort of beings, what sort of entity live there. And the longer that Oda holds out on this, the more curious I become. And then there's also some of the little stuff that I'm sure has been happening around the world that I'm sure we'll hear wind of. You know, the rest of the world isn't just standing still. We will probably get snapshots of what's happening globally during that time. time, and Harold, assuming that he continued his travels overseas, will continue to bring those stories back to Elbaf. You know, stories of rising pirates, shifting powers. Perhaps Oda will introduce yet another major global event that we haven't even heard of yet. But as always, let me know what you think. Let me know what you're most interested in seeing in the Elbaf flashback by leaving a comment below. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please like the video, share the video, and please do subscribe for more One Piece videos, and also to help a fellow fan get to 100,000 subscribers. You can also help support the channel further by becoming a Patreon or channel member like these wonderful, wonderful people. But as always, thank you for listening to another one of my ramblings. This is JoyGirl, and I'll see you again soon.